On a blood-soaked battlefield, the war between humans and giants had finally ended. The aftermath was devastating, leaving only death and destruction in its wake, and the country's knights were completely annihilated. The main character, Ronan, was the last one standing, exhausted, depressed, and drained. As Ronan gazed at the red sky with the sun setting on the horizon, he noticed the countless bodies scattered across the ground. The sight of his fallen comrades and knights who had fought by his side, reduced to lifeless corpses, brought him to tears. Suddenly, he heard a voice calling him a useless, worthless failure, which startled him. He quickly turned to see who the heck dared to speak to him in such a manner. To his surprise, the voice came from below. Looking down, he realized he was standing on one of the three giants, known as the Ahayuite. The giant had pale skin and devil-like horns. This brutal war had started when these three evil giants, with long horns and glowing, menacing eyes, mysteriously appeared in the Empire a few days ago. Without hesitation, they unleashed destruction on the entire kingdom at an unimaginable scale. The memory of how these vile creatures had turned a peaceful empire into a blood-soaked battlefield filled Ronan with rage. That moment, Ronan knelt atop the Ahayuite, confronting the giant directly, blaming the big evil guy for the massacre and the kingdom's downfall. Ronan declared that someone as evil as him had no reason to live any longer. The giant interrupted, calmly saying he wouldn't be alive for much longer, as he would soon be heading to the afterlife. Ronan replied that it was for the best, as his friends were already waiting for him in Nirvana. When the giant heard the word friends, he asked Ronan who he was referring to. Ronan smugly explained to the clueless moron that he meant the two other ugly giants who had come to the Empire alongside him. Ronan went on to reveal that one of them had been roasted like sushi by a dragon, and the other had been sealed away by the Empire's mage, Blockhorn. Saying these words brought a smile to Ronan's face, filling him with a strange sense of satisfaction. The giant, however, dismissed Ronan's claims, accusing him of capping hard. The Ahayuite yapped on and on about how Ronan was a miserable loser, but Ronan, disgusted and uninterested, turned his head, unwilling to engage in any more conversation with the defeated evil, worthless, disgusting waste of space. However, what caught Ronan's attention was when the giant remarked that beings as powerful as himself no longer existed in the land. This statement made Ronan glare at the Ahayuite. Demanding clarification, Ronan threatened to gouge out the giant's glowing eyes with his spear if he didn't explain what he meant. But the giant ignored the threat, telling Ronan that he had discovered his power too late and should have spent more time training instead of chasing after baddies with massive giants. These words enraged Ronan. Gritting his teeth, he cursed the giant, calling him a worthless bag of bones. Tired of the giant's croaky voice, Ronan used his sword to slice the giant's throat with precision. However, after doing so, the unbearable pain of losing his comrades returned, overwhelming him with grief. Tears flowed freely as memories of his fallen comrades flashed through his mind. Ronan then walked over to the pile of bodies, staring at the remains of his companions. Feeling utterly defeated, miserable, and alone, he lowered his head to the ground in despair. Just then, a voice broke through the silence, startling him. He immediately stopped crying, a spark of hope igniting in him. Maybe he wasn't the only one left alive. Summoning what little strength he had left, Ronan stood up and followed the sound. To his surprise, he came face to face with a badly bruised Adeshin, the female commander of the Empire. On seeing Adeshin, Ronan couldn't believe his eyes, as he never imagined any of his comrades would survive. But as he looked at her more closely, he noticed her left arm had been chopped off. Despite her condition, he was relieved he wasn't alone. In his typical insensitive fashion, the jerk teased Adeshin, saying she shouldn't be in such bad shape since she was the commander of the battalion. Adeshin, who was in severe pain, wasn't in the mood for his insensitivity. All she cared about was whether the Ahayuite were all dead. So Ronan confirmed he had just slit the throat of the last one. Hearing this, Adeshin felt a brief sense of relief and thanked Ronan for his effort. Trying to lighten the mood, Ronan joked that if she was indeed grateful, she could grant him a request. He requested that in the future, when the Empire recruited new soldiers, she should treat them kindly, not with her usual bitchy attitude. Hearing this, Adeshin gave Ronan a cold glare and told him she'd be lucky to make it out of the battlefield alive, considering how much blood she had lost. She added that since Ronan still had the energy to talk, he was obviously in better shape, and maybe he could be the commander and then treat the new recruits well. Her words made Ronan blush, but he quickly pointed out that he wasn't in good shape either. showing her his badly injured hand. Somehow, Ronan's humor managed to lift Adeshan's spirits a little. Adeshan then asked Ronan if he had one shot and one opportunity to do anything right. What would it be? Ronan replied that he had many things he wanted to do, but the one thing he'd do right away would be to attend the academy his late sister had asked him to go to. It was her dying wish for him. As they continued talking, they suddenly realized the rain had stopped, and a strange, blinding light filled the battlefield. Stunned, they wondered what was happening. As they tried to make sense of the situation, they saw an ahayuita with 8 wings hovering in the sky. But that wasn't all. More 8-winged giants filled the sky, flying above them. The sight sent a chill down their spines. Ronan, who had thought they had eradicated all the ahayuita, stood in fear, wondering where these new menaces had sprouted from. Adeshan, on the other hand, was not only scared but also devastated. All their sacrifices seemed meaningless now. It was clear that the ahayuita had won. She couldn't bear the thought that, after reincarnating 3 times to save the world from these goddamn freaky giants, she had failed once again. With only one more chance at reincarnation left, she knew something drastic had to be done, or the world as they knew it would be doomed. Her thoughts were interrupted when Ronan asked her to use her telekinesis magic to launch him into the sky so he could attack the winged giants. Upon hearing this, Adeshan was stunned. She couldn't believe Ronan still had the will to fight when it was obvious they were vastly outnumbered, and both of them were gravely injured. The realization that Ronan was willing to keep fighting despite everything amazed Adeshan. She had never thought someone with such an unbreakable determination existed. At that moment, Adeshan knew that for her final chance at reincarnation, she wouldn't use it for herself. She had found a better replacement in Ronan. Summoning all her remaining strength, Adeshan stood up, grabbed Ronan's shoulders, and kissed the cherry boy passionately, blowing his mind. This was the ugly cook loser's first kiss ever, and though the timing seemed strange, he wondered why it had to happen in such a dire moment. But then he realized something else. Adeshan wasn't just kissing him. She was using her tongue to pass something hot into his mouth. Adeshan had transferred the glowing ball of reincarnation into Ronan, after which she tried to whisper something to Ronan's ear, but her body was too weak and her words were incoherent. Ronan, curious about what Adeshan had shoved deep into his mouth, kept asking her what it was. With her last bit of strength, Adeshan responded, telling him that if they met again, he should convince her to stick to becoming a tailor and not play the heroine. She then smiled and then passed out. Suddenly, a bright light enveloped Ronan, and within that light, the magical reincarnation orb transported his soul back in time. Moments later, Ronan, who had passed out, regained consciousness. Opening his eyes, he found himself lying on soft grass in an empty green field. Shocked, he looked around for Adeshan but couldn't find her. Instead, he saw children playing by the riverside. Then he noticed something strange. He was younger, and the surroundings looked like his hometown. The truth hit him hard. He had returned to the past. Later on, Ronan sat under a tree, trying to process everything that had just happened. Memories of the kiss with Adeshan flooded his mind, triggering his brain to remember the mumbled words Adeshan whispered to his ears just before he reincarnated. She had revealed the power of reincarnation in the magical orb he had swallowed, urging him to use this last and only chance to defeat the giants. Adeshan had told him that he was the key to stopping the world's destruction, and to succeed he needed to sharpen his abilities. She added that he must enroll in the prestigious Philian Academy to hone his skills. Lastly, she begged that if they met again in this new life, he should remind her not to play the heroine but just to become a tailor. Despite all this, Ronan struggled to grasp the reality of the situation, thinking it must be a dream. In frustration, the brain-dead idiot started bashing his head against the tree to wake himself up. Seeing this bizarre act, 2 random bystanders thought he must have escaped from an asylum. After smashing his head several times, Ronan's brain cells finally clicked, and he realized that if he was truly in the past, his sister, who had died, might still be alive. The thought filled him with hope. So picking up a stick, he looked at the tree that had given him the idea and sprinted toward town, eager to see his sister again. On his way, he came across a group of familiar-looking faced delinquents bullying a young boy, hanging him upside down from a tree, not with a rope, but with magic. Intrigued, Ronan wondered who the magician was, since levitation magic had been a rare and valuable skill in his previous life during the war against the giants. Meanwhile, the bullied boy hanging from the tree begged the bully's leader to have mercy, explaining that he had no money left because he had used it all to buy medicine for his sick mother. The leader, a dude with the face of a depressed chimp, coldly responded that he didn't give a shit about the boy's mother. He only cared about money. Before the boy could say anything more, the bully delivered a hard, hole-digging slap to the dude's face. Watching this, the female magician named Asel, responsible for levitating the boy, begged the leader to stop his cruel Adolf Hitler behavior. Stunned by her words, the leader threatened Asel, ordering her to raise the boy even higher in the tree, or else her head would end up hanging alongside the boy. Terrified, Asel froze, not wanting to continue participating in the bullying. This wasn't the life she wanted. She had learned magic to prove she was capable of something good, not to harm others. Even though she was scared, Asel knew she couldn't endure it. She was about to release the boy from the tree when suddenly, Ronan smacked her on the head with a stick, thinking she was about to levitate the boy even higher. The hit immediately caused Asel to lose focus, and the boy fell from the tree. Enraged, the blonde-haired bully with his disgusting face thought Asel had dropped the boy on purpose. He then yelled at her, threatening to make her suffer if she didn't continue torturing the boy. But before he could do anything, Ronan interrupted, completely ignoring the cowardly bully, and started talking to Asel, asking her where she had learned telekinesis magic. Asel explained that she had learned magic from a grimoire she bought from a traveling peddler. Hearing this, Ronan's interest was immediately piqued. He thought that in this new life, he could add magic to the list of skills he wanted to master. However, his thoughts were abruptly interrupted by the familiar sound of a sword being drawn from its sheath. Turning around, Ronan saw the blonde-haired bully holding a sword behind his back, looking like a crazed would-be assassin. Furious at being ignored, the bully charged at Ronan. But Ronan's instincts as a former knight kicked in, and he effortlessly dodged the attack like a seasoned swordsman. Seeing this, the useless bully was stunned, realizing his attack was a worthless face. Trying to be cool, the bully acted as if nothing had happened and taunted Ronan, telling him he was lucky to have dodged the strike. Still confident, the blonde-haired bully threatened Ronan, demanding he kneel and beg for mercy, promising to spare his life if he complied. Playing along, Ronan pretended to be scared. But then the disgusting, cultured bully said something that flipped the switch. He threatened to isekai Ronan, and then have some fun with Ronan's sister's rice cake. That moment, Ronan's blood boiled. He wasn't sure if he had heard correctly, but his Asian persuasion had been replaced with Tyrone's finisher.
Now, I'm really mad.
In a flash, he moved and sliced off the bully's left ear without hesitation. The bully screamed in agony, clutching the side of his face where his ear used to be, crying uncontrollably as the pain overwhelmed him. Seeing their leader crying like a pathetic loser, the dumbfounded minions were shocked. They couldn't believe Ronan had managed to chop off the dude's ear with just a blunt stick. Stunned by Ronan's apparent strength, they'd froze in fear as Ronan ordered them to hand over all the money they had stolen through bullying. He then told them to pick up their disgusting leader and scram. Without hesitation, the minions obeyed, gathering their sniveling leader and running off like scared chickens. After they fled, Ronan pocketed a few coins and handed the rest of the money to the bullied boy. The boy, astonished and grateful, thanked Ronan for his kindness. Asel, who had been watching everything unfold, felt a deep sense of remorse for allowing herself to be used as a pawn by the bullies. Bowing her head in shame, she apologized to the boy she had helped torment. Though clearly angry at her, the boy forgave Asel, recognizing that she too had been a victim of the bullies. Shortly after, the boy left, still grateful for Ronan's help. Ronan then turned to Asel, expressing his interest in being trained by her in magic, though he mentioned it would have to wait for a few days as he had other urgent matters to attend to. Before leaving, he playfully threatened her, saying she ensured she came where he would use his sword on every part of her body with no exception. With that, Ronan dashed off to visit his sister, carrying flowers. As he reached the door of the house, he found himself growing nervous, his heart racing. This was a moment he had imagined countless times during his past life as a soldier, finally reuniting with his sister, but now that the moment had arrived, he didn't know what to say. Just as he turned to take a breath and calm his nerves, the door creaked open. Errol, his older sister with a face like an angel, had been alerted by the noise outside and came to see what was going on. When Ronan saw Errol, he was at a loss for words, completely speechless. His mind went blank, and all he could do was bow his head awkwardly. Moments later, inside the house, Errol, overjoyed to have her little brother home, prepared lunch and set it on the table. She was absolutely delighted to receive the flowers Ronan had brought her, especially since, in all the years they had been siblings, her thoughtless, uncaring shitty brother had never given her anything before. This was the first time. However, her euphoria was shut down when Ronan asked her how old she was. Errol, stunned by the ridiculousness of the question, paused. Nonetheless, she told him she was 22, then demanded to know why on earth Ronan had forgotten her age. She wondered aloud if Ronan had amnesia that was causing him to forget. Meanwhile, Ronan was deep in thought. If Errol were 22, then 10 years from now, the giants, the Ahayuites, would invade. He needed to be prepared. With that realization, he told Errol that he had decided to follow her advice and join the academy. Hearing this news made Errol overjoyed, as it was the best thing she had heard in a long time. Excited, she dashed into her room and returned with a large pot filled with money, explaining that she had been saving it for his academy admission, hoping that one day he'd change his mind and decide to enroll. Out of curiosity, Errol then asked which academy Ronan was planning to join. Ronan replied, telling her the Philneal Academy, causing her eyes to widen in shock. Errol was in disbelief when Ronan mentioned the prestigious Philian Academy, the Empire's most prestigious educational institution, with an entrance fee so exorbitant that only the wealthiest elite could afford it. However, seeing the determination in Ronan's eyes, she reluctantly agreed to support his decision. A few days later, Ronan set off for the Imperial Academy, but first stopped by the rendezvous point to meet Asel. As promised, she was waiting for him, though looking apprehensive. To begin her training, Ronan announced that she would have to undergo a test to prove she was worthy of being his magic teacher and companion. Ronan's test was unexpected. He instructed Asel to use her telekinesis to lift him as high as her powers would allow, straight into the sky. Asel was shocked by the request. Though she had practiced telekinesis, she was still relatively unskilled and had never attempted anything so extreme or dangerous. But Ronan was insistent, so Asel, nervous but determined, cast a spell called Invisible Hands, and a glowing light surrounded them as Ronan was slowly lifted into the air. Ronan, initially skeptical of Asel's abilities, was impressed. Her telekinesis reminded him of the war with the Ahayuited giants in his previous life, where powerful mages lifted soldiers to high vantage points so they could fight the giants. He knew then that Asel's abilities would be crucial in the battles to come. Asel, struggling to maintain her focus, began to scream that she couldn't hold the fat Methed in the air any longer, so Ronan asked her to hold a bit. He had to confirm one more thing. Without warning, Ronan unsheathed his sword and, in a quick motion, sliced through the invisible hands that were holding him up. He free-floated from the sky and landed with a heavy thud on the ground. Stunned by the move, Asel demanded to know why he had cut through her mana. Ronan, brushing off her concern, replied, telling her it was an acrobatic skill he had been practicing for a long time and decided to try it out. He then congratulated her, declaring that she had passed the test, and signaled that there was still more to do before the night was over. Though it was late into the night, Asel followed Ronan hesitantly. Along the way, Ronan disclosed his plan to join the Philian Academy and invited her to join him. Asel's immediate reaction was to think Ronan had lost his mind. She couldn't believe how someone as broke as they were could even dream of attending such a prestigious academy reserved for the elite of the elite. Sensing her reluctance, Ronan pressed her, asking why she didn't want to go. Asel, afraid to tell him the brutal truth, that they were useless nobodies who could barely afford daily meals, much less the Philian Academy's entrance fee. She told him instead that she was hesitant because she didn't have enough talent and was shy and cowardly. With this, Ronan tried persuading Asel and told her she was talented, but if she refused to go to the academy with him, she would be wasting her talents helping thugs and goons. He continued with a motivational Twitter quote and told her that she would continue to be a wimp and coward if she didn't take the step to change her life. Hearing this advice, only Andrew Tate could dish out. Asel's mind was blown, and her eyes glistened. She held her mouth in wonder because she had never heard such a piece of solid advice from a top G. Even her bastard father never dished it out like this. With this, she told Ronan she would love to accompany him to the Philian Academy. Hearing this made Ronan smirk because he had always known how to play on the fish brains of women. So Ronan told Asel that their first step to getting into the academy would commence that night. Few minutes later, Ronan took Asel to the campsite of the monster lunar goblins and told her that in order to bring out all her dormant skills, the lunar goblin would be her opponent. The lunar goblins were far from ordinary goblins. They were notorious for their disgusting appearance, resembling some of the losers watching this video, and had an insatiable obsession with golden treasures. Known for ambushing merchants and stealing their goods, the lunar goblins hoarded their stolen treasures in a sacred area to celebrate under the full moon in wild festivals. After briefing Asel on this, Ronan revealed the plan. She would use her telekinesis to steal the goblins' treasures while they slept. Hearing this, Asel's heart raced. She had never done anything so dangerous in her life, and the thought of being caught by the goblins petrified her. Desperate for more information, she asked Ronan what would happen if the goblins woke up during a heist. Ronan responded and told her that they would definitely become goblin snacks. Asel had never been so scared in all her life, and tried talking some sense into Ronan's thick head. However, Ronan pointed out that in order for them to achieve the goal of getting into the elite academy, they needed two things. One, they needed money to afford the insane tuition fee, and second, they needed experience. By stealing the treasures of the goblins, they would be using one stone to eliminate two birds. Still trembling with fear but having no other options, Asel reluctantly agreed. Summoning all her strength, she began to use her telekinesis to lift the treasures, one by one, from the goblin's chest and deposit them into Ronan's bag. Each time a gold coin floated through the air, Asel's heart skipped a beat, fearing the goblins would stir at any moment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bag was filled to the brim. Ronan, impressed by her skill, patted her head like she was his obedient minion. He never expected her to succeed, but now that they had gathered a small fortune in gold, they were ready to leave. Ronan quickly covered the bag, motioning for Asel to follow him as they quietly tried to escape before the goblins awoke. Just as they were about to make their way out, chaos erupted. Two random losers came sprinting in their direction, screaming for help as they were chased by a monster bird. The deafening noise they made immediately alerted the goblins, jolting them awake. The goblins instantly noticed their treasure chest had been looted, and rage filled their eyes as they scanned the area for the thieves. Ronan and Asel then tried to slip away unnoticed through a bush path, but the goblins spotted them instantly. Realizing the ugly-ass goblins were awake, Ronan knew shit was about to get real while Asel had already peed herself. The goblins didn't waste any time charging at the treasure thieves, referring to Ronan and Asel. Seeing the goblins coming for them, Asel began to beg Ronan to throw away the bag filled with gold and scram, but Ronan refused and decided to fight. Just as the goblins got close, Ronan unsheathed his sword, and before the goblins could make a move, Ronan sliced off 3 of the goblins' heads, at once like an expert swordsman. As Ronan finished decimating the goblins, leaving none alive, Asel stood frozen, horrified by the brutal carnage she had just witnessed. The sight of Ronan beheading the goblins, disappearing briefly only to reappear in time to slice off more heads, played over and over in her mind. It was as though he was a phantom, effortlessly moving through the battlefield without a hint of hesitation. His combat skills were terrifyingly precise, and to Asel, it was almost inhuman. Noticing Asel spacing out, Ronan snapped her back to reality with a curt call, urging her to hurry up and grab her bags so they could leave. On their way toward the Imperial Academy, Asel complained about the weight of the gold, the bag weighing her down, but her complaints were more a way of processing what she'd just seen than about the actual load. As they trudged along, Asel asked about the 2 fools who had drawn the monster's attention toward them and ruined their stealthy heist. Ronan, clearly still irked by their interference, cursed under his breath, irritated at how the entire goblin fight had been unnecessary. Suddenly, an arrow whizzed through the air, aimed straight for Ronan. With lightning reflexes, he caught it in his hand, leaving Asel wide-eyed in shock. Just then, Ronan scanned the woods and noticed the 2 culprits. None other than Dumb and Dumber from earlier, one of whom was now holding a bow. Seeing the gold in Ronan's bag, the dumb one, trying to act friendly, began approaching with a sly grin, though his intent was anything but peaceful. As the Morn got closer, he introduced himself as Caliboro. In the middle of his introduction, Caliboro tried to impale Ronan with a hidden blade, but Ronan, ever alert, caught his arm mid-stab and delivered a bone-crushing uppercut to his jaw, sending him crashing to the ground, blood spewing from his mouth. Seeing his partner in crime lying on the ground, the dumber thug attempted to charge at Ronan with his own blade. This time, however, Asel stepped up. With a quick spell, she cast invisible hands, restraining the thug's movements. The dude struggled in vain as Ronan calmly stepped forward and slashed him multiple times, his blade cutting through the air in a deadly dance. Blood splattered everywhere, and Asel's stomach churned at the sight. Asel, who had seen enough gruesome sights for one night, was completely horrified at seeing blood splattered everywhere. She didn't understand why Roman had to isekai the guy, so Ronan explained that if he hadn't ended the dude's life, then the scumbag would have sent him to the afterlife instead. After this, Ronan then asked Asel if she knew the name Caliboro, which the scoundrel had initially mentioned. Asel responded and told him that the Caliboro were a group responsible for kidnapping, organ trafficking, and every crime that could be possibly imagined. Just then, Ronan noticed that something was moving inside the tied sack that the hoodlums had carried on them. So he moved closer and untied it. That moment, he witnessed two mean glowing eyes, and in the blink of an eye, a bluebird flew out of the sack. Upon seeing the bluebird, both Ronan and Asel were mesmerized and surprised, as they had never seen a bluebird before. However, Ronan quickly noticed that the bird's leg was shackled with a Caliboro poaching restraint, a device that blocked the prisoner's mana, preventing the use of magical powers. He wondered why the two ugly pieces of shit had used such a shackle on an innocent bird, as it was typically reserved for capturing fantastical creatures. Suddenly, a glowing communication circle appeared behind the bird, and from it, they heard a voice that shocked them. The voice, gruff and male, introduced himself as Varin, the guardian of the bluebird, and informed them that he was currently researching fantastical beasts at the academy. After the brief introduction, Varin demanded to know why Ronan and Asel were in possession of his bird. Ronan explained that they had fought off poachers who had kidnapped the bird. Varin, relieved, thanked Ronan and Asel for saving his companion and promised to repay their kindness. Ronan told him they didn't need any repayment, they just wanted to return the bird. Realizing that the bird was magical, Ronan figured that if he freed its legs from the shackles, it would be able to find its way home. With that, Ronan unsheathed his sword and shattered the shackles binding the bird's feet. Once freed, the bird excitedly fluttered around Ronan, then started nudging its butt into his face. Confused by the bird's strange behavior, Ronan asked Varin what it was trying to do. Varin explained that the bird wanted Ronan to pluck one of its feathers to use as a compass so it could return to him. Ronan then gently settled the bird in his palm and plucked a feather. Immediately after, the bird flew away with incredible speed, leaving Ronan amazed. As the bird disappeared into the distance, Asel noticed that it had left something behind in Ronan's palm, a strange egg. A few days later, Ronan and Asel visited the trader's market, where they met a merchant named Carabel. So they sold the gold and treasures they had taken from the goblins for cash. On the other hand, Ronan was thrilled to finally meet a merchant who understood the true value of the treasures and was willing to pay a fair price, unlike the other crackhead scammers he had dealt with earlier. As they were wrapping up the deal, Ronan showed Carabel the bluebird's egg and asked if it had any value. Carabel then examined the egg with his magnifying lens and admitted that while he didn't know exactly what it was, he was certain it was worth something valuable. He said he could give a more definitive answer after examining it in a secure location. After that, Ronan then inquired if Carabel had any books from Philian Academy, as they needed one for the entrance exam. Carabel mentioned that his own daughter was preparing for the same exam and might be able to help. As they spoke, Carabel's daughter, Maria, arrived and curiously asked who the strangers were that her father was speaking to. When Ronan saw Maria, he was stunned. She was the spitting image of a comrade from his past life. Carabel then introduced Ronan and Asel as his customers to Maria, with whom he had just completed a big business deal. However, Maria seemed doubtful and wondered aloud what kind of business deal her father could have with such kids that looked like homeless brokies. Annoyed, Carabel snapped at her, demanding she never refer to his esteemed customers as kids again. Ronan, still in shock from Maria's uncanny resemblance to someone he used to know, moved closer to examine her up close. He then asked if her name was really Maria, which caught her off guard. She confirmed that her name was indeed Maria and asked why the ugly creep was so interested. Still uncertain, Ronan leaned in and asked her to bring her ear closer so he could whisper something to her. Reluctantly, she complied, but when she did, the cultured freak whispered, asking whether Maria had a sausage or a honeypot down there, which left her completely horrified. At that moment, Maria couldn't believe the ridiculousness of what she had just heard. She wondered if she had misheard, but the worthless gutter brain continued yapping, going on about how it was impossible for Maria to have Captain Peter down there, because her chest was fully occupied with bazongas. That was it. Maria's blood boiled hotter than a volcano, and she could no longer hold back her rage. With all her strength, she slapped Ronan across the face, leaving his cheek ruffled from the impact. That face-warping slap triggered a memory for Ronan. He instantly recalled that in his past life, when he had just joined the army, there was a soldier disguised as a man who handled the army's supplies, Maria. She had been easygoing, getting along with all the soldiers. However, she had earned the infamous nickname Slapmaster 3000 because she'd smack anyone who brought up topics about male anatomy. Ronan had always been curious as to why Maria enjoyed slapping people, but never got the chance to ask before she died. Now in the present, he realized the reason. She was secretly a girl, and that's why she was always set off whenever the boys talked about their magnums. This revelation made Ronan laugh, which only infuriated Maria more. He wasn't even remorseful for his idiotic behavior. Fueled by anger, Maria charged at Ronan, ready to punch some sense into his thick skull. But Ronan had had enough of her assaults, so he grabbed her hair and gave her a hard whack to her head, which produced an extra small skull instantly. Furious, Maria retaliated with a headbutt that nearly knocked Ronan's 32 teeth out. What followed was a full-on brawl between the two, fighting like silly kids, so Asel and Carabel, who stood by and watched in shock, rushed in to break them up. Later that day, to everyone's surprise, Ronan and Maria reconciled and even became best friends, much to Asel's disbelief after witnessing their earlier clash. As they chatted, Maria admired the weapons Ronan had brought along for the Academy's entrance exam, particularly the black sword. She noted how sturdy it was, the type knights typically used. However, Ronan insisted that the kind of sword he used was thicker and longer. Then Maria turned to Asel, asking what kind of magic she used. Asel revealed her power was telekinesis. Impressed, Maria complimented her, saying that with such an incredible ability, Asel would surely earn a scholarship at the Academy. After that, Maria then asked Ronan about the technique he planned to display during the practical exam, which caught him off guard. He had no idea there would be a practical exam. Asel explained that the practical portion was even more important than the written test. Students were required to showcase their abilities in front of the Academy's professors, and it was the key determinant in whether they would be admitted. Ronan, still processing this new information, said he had planned on demonstrating his swordsmanship. However, Maria urged him to study also for the written exam, or he was going to have a hard time. But Ronan realized she was making something else hard. Maria later informed Ronan that most students also demonstrated their use of mana during the practical. Hearing this surprised Ronan, who thought only mages used mana. Realizing Ronan was utterly clueless about mana and couldn't even sense his own, Maria was stunned. She then asked him to step outside so she could teach him how to sense his mana and give him some special training. Grabbing the black sword, Maria led the way outside and Ronan followed. Once outside, Maria gave Ronan a long, boring lecture on the essence of mana, explaining how it was the natural energy present everywhere in the world. She added that not everyone could sense mana easily. It usually required physical training and could take up to a year to master. She went on to say that only students who had learned to sense and control their mana could enter Philian Academy. After the boring lecture, Maria announced it was time for some practical training, encouraging Ronan to rely on his body, not his head, during combat. Without warning, Maria charged at Ronan, and their blades clashed, sparks flying with each impact. As Ronan locked eyes with Maria, he noticed her eyes were glowing, which left him completely stunned. At that moment, Ronan and Maria stared at each other like they were posing for a Mortal Kombat poster. That instant, Ronan swung his blade, trying to slash her, but Maria skillfully dodged, leaving him stunned. He hadn't expected her to avoid his strike. On the other hand, Maria was equally shocked. She had charged at Ronan with all her mana, expecting to end the duel in a single blow. But Ronan stood firm without using any mana of his own. Maria had used her mana because she wanted to show Ronan that without mastering how to sense his own mana, the practical exam at the Academy would be a humiliating disaster for him. As their blades clashed again, Ronan began to overwhelm her with his agility and impressive swordsmanship. At one point, he delivered a powerful slash that came dangerously close to chopping off Maria's milk jugs, so she quickly retreated to avoid losing more than just the fight. Maria started to wonder why Ronan was taking the duel so seriously when it was supposed to be a playful sparring session. The duel ended shortly after, and as Ronan walked away, he told her she was talented with the blade, even without using mana. However, he added, she was a bit clumsy and needed to work on finding her center of balance. Seeing Ronan leave as though he had won the fight irritated Maria, so she yelled for him to come back so they could continue. However, that moment, Ronan's sword, which she had borrowed from the table for the duel, suddenly shattered in her hands, leaving her stunned. Ronan, noticing this, insisted that she would have to repay him for the destroyed weapon. The next morning, at the trader's market, Ronan showed up to collect the payment for his broken sword. Instead of offering money, Maria presented him with books from the academy that would help him prepare for the entrance exam. Ronan, unimpressed, assumed she was just trying to rip him off. Maria reassured him that she wasn't trying to scam him. She genuinely wanted them all to succeed and get into the academy. A few minutes later, the traders finished their work for the day, packed up their goods, and prepared to leave. Before parting ways, Maria urged Ronan to study hard, so they could all pass the entrance exam. She said goodbye, adding that they would meet again at the imperial capital on test day. After she left, Ronan knew he had a lot of work to do. If he wanted any chance of getting into the academy, he would need to put in serious study time and training. Determined, he headed back home to his sister Iril. Days passed and Ronan continued his physical training by hunting down the monsters terrorizing the village, which helped improve his stamina and adaptability. At the same time, every night, he studied the books Maria had given him, preparing his mind for the upcoming exam. Weeks flew by and finally the day of the Philian Academy entrance exam arrived in the imperial city. The academy was the most prestigious institution in the city. Ronan arrived to find Asel completely entranced by the city's beauty, so he snapped her out of her daze and urged her to continue on their way to the academy. As they walked, Asel noticed how much Ronan had grown. He was taller, more muscular, and far more imposing than before. Ronan, noticing the plotless girl staring, jerked her from dreamland with a hard knock, and told her to stop dreaming because her flat chest would turn his magnum off permanently.
That one there was a violation. Personally, I wouldn't have it.
As they walked, Ronan wondered if he would get the chance to meet Shulapin, the city's strongest swordsman, at the academy. Asel interrupted his thoughts, asking if Ronan still had the feather from the bluebird. Ronan confirmed that he had kept it safe and pulled it out. As soon as he did, the feather began to signal that it wanted them to climb the tall building they were standing next to. Meanwhile, Varin, the bluebird's owner and a professor of zoology at Philian Academy, was upstairs in his office. Varin, who also happened to be a literal talking lion, was about to open his window to let in some air. But just as he reached for it, he was startled when Ronan crashed through the window like a complete idiot, causing Varin's lion instincts to kick in, and he let out a deafening roar. Few moments later, Varin finally regained his composure and demanded to know who Ronan was and why he had entered his office through the window like a thief. In response, Ronan showed him the bluebird's feather, which shocked Varin as he realized that the intruder was actually one of the heroes who had saved his bird. Apologizing for roaring at him, Varin invited Ronan and Asel to take a seat. Ronan acknowledged his mistake, admitting that entering through the window made him look like a lunatic. Varin, still surprised, remarked that if he had known they were academy applicants, he would have written them a recommendation letter right away. Ronan then presented Varin with an egg that the bluebird, Marpus, had laid in his palm. Varin carefully examined the egg and admitted he had no idea what creature might hatch from it. He explained that blue dream birds absorb the mana from their surroundings, which is then passed into the egg. Depending on the environment, a phoenix could hatch from the egg if it had absorbed lava mana, or a monster might emerge if it had absorbed mana from a monster's nest. Varin sensed a variety of mana within the egg and suggested that Ronan take care of it, as Marpus had specifically chosen to lay it in his hand, indicating the bird must have sensed something special about Ronan. However, Varin warned him to be cautious with the egg, as a blue dream bird only lays one egg in its lifetime. As Ronan and Asel stood to leave, Varin stopped them and handed Ronan a folded piece of paper containing a map, explaining that it would help him when the egg began to hatch. Later that day, Ronan headed to the main building of Philian Academy and waited in the martial arts practical testing hall with the other students. Meanwhile, Asel attended the mage practical test in a different hall. As the instructor began calling in students one by one for the exam, Ronan waited for his turn and was soon joined by Maria. Ronan noticed that Maria had changed outfit, dressed in a Star Wars-style costume, and he couldn't help but wonder why. Maria had explained that since Philian Academy was a prestigious school attended by nobles, she wanted to look presentable, unlike Ronan, who had been wearing the same disgusting Peter Griffin shirt for days. Just then, the instructor called Ronan's name and asked him to go into the private hall. Maria wished Ronan good luck and told him to break a leg, but Ronan wished he could break her waist instead.
Stop it. Get some help.
Once inside the private hall, Ronan faced 5 professors and the judges for the practical test. The senior judge, sitting in the middle, was an old man who looked like Santa Claus after his sleigh had been hijacked by bandits. His name was Crater, the Academy's headmaster. To his left was Nabros, the Academy's swordsmanship instructor, who resembled a broke Megan Thee Stallion before she became famous. On entering, Ronan respectfully bowed his head and introduced himself. Crater then informed him that for the practical test, he would have to spar against a magically engineered dummy, and they expected his best performance. Crater also asked Ronan what technique he planned to use. Ronan replied that he intended to perform a fast cut. Hearing this, one of the judges, an old man with a ridiculously long beard, looking like he had smoked 500 cigarettes, began mocking Ronan along with his white-haired colleague, who had the face of diabetes. Despite their taunts, Ronan ignored their old scrawny ass, adjusted his footing, and struck the dummy with incredible power, leaving Nabros utterly stunned. As Ronan finished his attack, the 2 grumpy, old, disgusting professors continued to mock him, but Crater was impressed by what he had just witnessed. Nabros, still in awe, leaped from her seat, sword in hand, and thrust it toward Ronan's neck, demanding to know where he had learned such a swordsmanship style. Hearing this absurd question, Ronan wondered what on earth the nutcase was talking about. Sensing his confusion, Nabros rephrased her question, asking why he had struck the dummy 3 times in one swift move. She insisted that his fast cut had actually delivered 3 strikes, something only a seasoned swordsman would notice. She added that it was reckless of him to think he could deceive them, given their experience. Meanwhile, the 2 professors with gutter faces were completely lost, unable to grasp what was happening. Nabros then withdrew her sword from Ronan's neck and walked back to her seat, promising to remember his ugly face if he made it into the academy. She shot him a cold glance, assuring him that if he did, she would personally take him under her wing. Crater, unfazed by the tension, commended Ronan and informed him that, to conclude the practical test, he would need to answer a final question. Crater then asked Ronan what he hoped to learn at Philian Academy. Ronan paused and thought deeply as memories of his past life on the battlefield flooded his mind, and after a moment of reflection, he responded like one whose brain had been eaten by a virus, saying he simply didn't want to have any regrets. This response took Crater by surprise. As Ronan left the hall, Crater smiled to himself, finding Ronan to be an intriguing and talented individual. He wondered how he could teach Ronan the path to a life without regrets. Seeing Crater smile, the ugly professor with the beard of a billy goat wondered what was making Walmart Santa Claus smile, and assumed for Crater to smile then, he must have noticed something special about Ronan. At that moment, the magical dummy's armor shattered, and its head fell off, causing the 2 old freaks who had mocked Ronan earlier to nearly have heart attacks. No student had ever managed to scratch the magically engineered dummy, let alone decapitate it. Meanwhile, as Ronan left the building where the students had initially gathered, he thought back to how expertly Nabros had attacked him earlier and felt reassured that he had made the right decision in coming to Philian Academy. He was eager to learn from the best. Several hours later, the written exam was completed, after which Manhwa and Asel came outside to find Ronan looking depressed, sulking over his poor performance on the written test. Manhwa tried to lift his spirits, assuring him that he'd still be fine since the practical exam was the main determinant of admission into the academy. She was confident that with his skills, he would surely make it in. Just then, the list of students who had passed and gained admission to the academy was displayed magically in the sky. Asel's name appeared first. She placed 12th in the practical exam and came first in the theory. Next, Manhwa's name appeared. She placed 9th in both the practical and the theory. Overjoyed, the 2 girls celebrated their success and the fact that they were entering the academy. Ronan, however, couldn't find his name on the list. Feeling defeated, he'd assumed he had failed and considered himself a useless failure. Manhwa couldn't stand the thought of Ronan not joining them, so she grabbed his face, widened his eyes, and urged him to check the list again. His name had to be there somewhere. As Ronan scanned the list for the second time, he noticed something unusual: a ball of fire descending from the sky at an incredible speed. The fireball then crashed and exploded in the middle of the crowd. Out of the flames emerged a majestic phoenix with giant wings. The phoenix spat out a smaller ball of fire, which revealed a message in the sky. Ronan had been named the salutatorian of the martial arts department, with a perfect score in the practical exam and an almost last ranking in the theory. Ronan, Maria, and Asel stared at the message in shock, unable to believe it. Not only had Ronan been admitted, but he had also done it with unmatched flair. Overcome with excitement, Maria and Asel hugged him tightly, with Maria pressing her chest puppies on Ronan's face, causing the dude to release. As the girls celebrated, Ronan's mind wandered, and he began to think, since he had come first, does that mean the greatest swordsman from his past life, Shulapin, had lost to him? Before Ronan could finish his thought, Shulapin walked into the scene like Prince Charming, heading straight for him. He stopped in front of Ronan and asked if he was the one he lost to. Seeing Shulapin, the star boy of the academy, approach, the other students were mesmerized and watched in awe to see what would unfold. Ronan, however, knew exactly why Shulapin had approached him. In his previous life, Shulapin had been a complete jerk, obsessed with being number one and hating on anyone who stole the spotlight from him. To avoid dealing with the attention hog, Ronan quickly said he had no idea he came in first. Shulapin, clearly irritated, snapped at Ronan, telling him to stop capping and pretending he didn't know. Calmly, Ronan told Shulapin to prove his accusations if he was so sure. Without another word, Shulapin drew his sword and attacked Ronan to prove his point. The other students immediately gathered, eager to watch the fight. Shulapin unleashed a series of attacks, but Ronan dodged, doing his best to avoid sparring with the arrogant idiot. However, realizing that Shulapin was determined to send him to Nirvana, Ronan had no choice but to engage in the fight. The two soon became locked in a fierce battle, their swords clashing as Shulapin unleashed his aura with every strike. It became painfully clear to Ronan that if things continued like this, he'd be a goner. So in a flash of survival instinct, he decided to make a run for it. But Shulapin gave chase, hot on his heels. As Ronan dashed away, running faster than a headless chicken, Shulapin yelled furiously, calling him a coward and demanding that he stop running and fight like a man. Ronan, however, had no intention of listening to the crazed maniac. He sprinted towards Asel and Maria, grabbed them by the hands, and dragged them with him like they weighed nothing. Just then, the academy's security officer, a man who had a similar resemblance to Saitama on Ozempic, casually strolled in. With a smug look, he demanded to know who was fighting on school grounds and why. When he saw Shulapin, the academy's prized student, standing there with a bloody nose, the lanky security officer, with a magical orb-shaped head, asked who dared to mess up Shulapin's face, swearing to unleash mayhem on the culprit. Shulapin, however, waved it off, saying it was just a friendly fight between boys. But as Shulapin sheathed his sword, he noticed something shocking. His sword was cracked from attacking Ronan. Realizing this, Shulapin acknowledged that Ronan was not just an ordinary swordsman, but a worthy rival. The next day, Ronan and Asel traveled to the outskirts of the capital, deep into the forest. Using the map Varn had given him, Ronan was searching for the pool of aura. Along the way, Asel expressed her concern about Ronan's fight with Shulapin, which had resulted in Shulapin's bloody nose. Shulapin wasn't just the Academy's star student, he was also the heir to one of the great families of the Imperial City. Asel was worried about possible retaliation from Shulapin. Ronan reassured her, saying there was no need to worry. Despite Shulapin being a maniac, obsessed with swordsmanship, he was still a man of principles and trust. Shortly after, they arrived at the Manhwa vein that Varn had told them about, a body of water where mana from around the world gathered, and this magical pool was known for solving all kinds of magical problems. Varn had instructed Ronan to bring the blue dream bird's egg here to hatch. While Ronan focused on the pool, Asel observed their surroundings and pointed out something strange. Varn had initially mentioned that all kinds of fantastical beasts came to the Manhwa vein to hatch their young, so regular animals should be around as well. However, during their journey and since arriving at the pool, she hadn't seen a single animal. Hearing Ronan's warning, Asel wondered when he became associated with Sherlock Holmes. Ronan just smiled and called her clueless, pointing out that there were already guests who had arrived before them. As if on cue, arrows imbued with mana flew in their direction, but Ronan swiftly slashed through them, parrying the attack. As he stared at the shattered arrows, Ronan had a flashback to his past life. He remembered overhearing a dude bragging about these special arrows, claiming they could take down any beast with a single shot. Although Ronan wasn't interested at the time, he recalled the guy mentioning that these arrows belonged to the Caraballo organization, a group notorious for destroying the forest. Back in the present, Ronan realized the Caraballo were behind the attack, so he immediately instructed Asel to stay hidden. With that, Ronan charged at the Caraballo members. However, the moment they saw him coming, the bandits scattered, leaping into the trees. Knowing he didn't have the time or patience to hunt them down one by one, Ronan quickly devised a plan. He loudly announced that he was an ally, and that they didn't need to run just because they saw him. He claimed to be the youngest member of a newly opened branch of the organization and introduced himself as a Hayuit. Hearing this, they lowered their guard and gathered on the ground. However, one of them, a pink-haired, was suspicious and found it hard to believe that a kid like Ronan was part of the Caraballo organization. Ronan, unfazed, told the dude that if he didn't believe him, he could confirm it with the new branch. Then Ronan added that judging by how ugly the guy's face was, he probably didn't have much common sense in that poorly dyed head of his.
Emotional damage!
Getting roasted by a kid made the pink-haired furious, realizing things might escalate. Another team member, who was wearing an ugly mask, intervened. He told the pink-haired to calm down and stop acting like he lacked common sense. A few minutes later, their boss arrived, a guy named Biam, and on seeing him, the pink-haired immediately approached him, asking if he was aware that the organization had hired a new member, referring to Ronan. But Ronan had been waiting for this. Seeing that all the members were now gathered in one place, he smiled. It had been his plan all along. As Biam, with his massive bald head and aggressive expression, began interrogating Ronan decided it was the perfect moment to strike. In one swift move, Ronan drew his sword and divided him into two in a single clean stroke. He then continued, slashing through the other members with precision. Without hesitation, Ronan charged at Biam, and with a precise strike, dropped him, leaving the pink-haired petrified. However, Ronan wasn't done yet, as he swiftly sliced the pink-haired also. Then he tossed a piece of paper at him and demanded, with a menacing smile, that he sketch out the locations of all the Caraballo branches. If he refused, Ronan promised to end his existence, but the terrified dude stammered that he had nothing to draw with. Ronan remarked that the dude had the perfect tool. His own fingers were better than any marker. Hearing this sent the pink-haired into a state of total shock. After a few minutes, the pink-haired finished, drawing out the locations on the paper with his body red ink, and handed it to Ronan. Ronan then examined the paper and complimented him on his artistic prowess. The pink-haired thanked Ronan, groveling and begging for his life, but Ronan wasn't the merciful type of protagonist. Without hesitation, he slashed the dude like Fruit Ninja. A few minutes later, after confirming the existence of the Man of Aim, Ronan told Asel it was time to leave. But before they could go, the tied pouch where Ronan had kept the blue dream bird egg began to glow, catching his attention. Just as he tried to figure out why the egg was glowing, Asel called his attention to something even more terrifying. A river of blood was flowing toward them, sending a wave of fear through both of them. Ronan instinctively thought about making a run for it, but just then, the blue dream bird egg slipped from his grasp and began levitating, emitting a bright light. At that moment, the river of blood started swirling around the egg, and in the blink of an eye, the egg absorbed all the blood in a truly horrifying display. Once the blood was completely absorbed, the egg remained suspended in the air. Ronan, relieved, thought the terrifying ordeal was finally over. But it was far from finished. The egg suddenly began to crack like it was hatching. Excited, Ronan watched eagerly, having waited so long to see what would emerge from the egg. In a flash, his excitement turned to pain as he received a brutal sucker punch to the nose, nearly knocking the wind out of him. Out of the cracked egg emerged a black-winged beast with two large eyes and a tail. Ronan, still nursing his throbbing nose, stared at the creature in confusion, trying to figure out what it was. To his surprise, the black beast cozied up to him and, without warning, summoned a magical circle that emitted a brilliant light, and the light completely healed Ronan's injuries. Realizing the creature had the power to heal, Ronan grew excited and started thinking of a name for it. Just as he was pondering, the little creature suddenly darted off, chasing after a dude named Balrouse, the errand boy for the Caraballo organization. Balrouse had returned from running an errand to find his entire team murdered, and was now desperately trying to escape the black-winged creature. In his panic, he tripped and crashed to the ground. Hovering above Balrouse, the black-winged creature began to glow, and in a horrifying twist, started absorbing his blood, causing Balrouse to scream in agonizing pain. Just in time, Ronan and Asel arrived. Ronan quickly called out to the creature, which he had decided to name Sita, and commanded it to stop. To his relief, Sita obeyed, flying back to Ronan, who began playing with it as if nothing had happened. Balrouse, still in shock from nearly having his blood sucked out like juice with a straw, could only stare in disbelief. Ronan then approached Balrouse and surprisingly called him by name. Balrouse, not realizing at first that Ronan had spoken his name, thanked him for saving his life. But when his last two brain cells finally clicked, he realized Ronan shouldn't have known his name. In Ronan's previous life, Balrouse had been the poacher who tipped him off about the Carabola organization's activities. Now in the present, Ronan pressed his sword to Balrouse's neck, making his spirit nearly leave his body in fear. Ronan calmly informed Balrouse that there was something he needed him to do, and it wasn't a request. The following day, Ronan ventured into the city to sell the mana vein water he had scooped into a jar the day before. He sold the water to Caravel, who paid him a hefty amount of gold. Ronan, in his entire miserable life, had never imagined he could cash out just by selling water from a pond. Before this, he and Asel had visited Varen's office to thank him for providing the map that helped them locate the mana vein, which was now making Ronan cash out like a forex trader. However, they were informed that Varen had left for a long-term business trip. On the other hand, the day before, Ronan had threatened Balrouse to locate the other branches of the Carabola organization using the blood-drawn map from the pink-haired team member. If Balrouse failed, Ronan assured him he'd be joining the rest of his team in the afterlife. In the present, Asel asked what Ronan planned to do with the money he gained from selling the mana vein water. With the academy entrance ceremony fast approaching, Ronan knew he'd soon be leaving his elder sister, Errol. Wanting to make her happy, he pondered how best to spoil her. A few days later, Ronan decided to indulge Errol, taking her to the finest fashion store in town to buy designer clothes. As she stared at the mountain of Fendi and Gucci items Ronan bought for her, Errol was floored. She asked her brother if he had turned into a robber. Ronan laughed it off, saying that all their lives as siblings, he had been a total invalid as her brother, and now it was about time she enjoyed the benefits of having a brother. Overjoyed by his sentimental words, Errol was on cloud 9. She never thought her once worthless brother would mature enough to have such common sense. After their shopping spree, Ronan mentioned he needed to visit a workshop to purchase a weapon for his time at the academy. On their way out the door, Ronan bumped into none other than Shullapin, which gave Ronan a shock. Startled, Ronan asked if Shullapin was stalking him. With an annoyed tone, Shullapin retorted that he'd rather stalk a frog. He'd explained that he was at the store to buy a new sword since his previous one had been ruined in their pointless fight. The conversation quickly turned heated as the two began sizing each other up, on the verge of drawing their swords for yet another meaningless duel. But before they could escalate things, Errol stepped between them, asking them to behave like alpha males for once and stop acting like sissies. She then turned to Shullapin and apologized for her brother's crazed behavior. Entranced by Errol's beauty, Shullapin's mind started wandering into questionable territories, and he suddenly morphed into a full-on simp. In a display of newfound humility, he told Errol it was his fault for always antagonizing Ronan. Sensing his weakness, Errol decided to flirt even more, grabbing his hand and flashing a smile. She thanked him for reconciling with her brother, and asked him to look after Ronan when they arrived at the academy. To which Shullapin completely agreed. Ronan, watching this bizarre spectacle, wondered what in the Looney Tunes was going on. The ultimate shock came when Shullapin handed Errol a gold, circle-shaped family emblem, a symbol of his family's prestige, which could be used to buy anything in the city. He even told her she could purchase a sword if she wanted and gave her directions to where she could get the finest sword. As Shullapin left the store, Ronan remained in stunned silence. The Shullapin he just witnessed was a far cry from the arrogant, self-centered prick he had known in his previous life. This new version of Shullapin was different. Before long, the day of the academy entrance ceremony arrived. Students gathered outside the academy's main building to be addressed by Crater, the headmaster. Crater welcomed the fresh batch of students and then gave an excruciatingly long, boring speech, encouraging them to do their best and make something of their otherwise useless lives. Ronan, bored out of his mind, yawned like a donkey, his mouth wide open. Just as the speech seemed to drag on forever, Crater suddenly gave an evil grin and snapped his fingers. In an instant, the sky shattered like glass, and the students were teleported to a massive coliseum with a roaring crowd that left them all in shock. With a smirk, Crater informed the freshman students that the real entrance ceremony had just begun, and it was time for the juniors to meet the seniors. Every year, during the academy's entrance ceremony, It was a tradition for the freshmen to spar against the second-year sophomore students. The two top scorers from the practical entrance exam would represent the freshmen, taking on 4 appointed second-year students. This year, the chosen freshmen were Ronan and Shulapin, while the opponents from year 2 were already known to be formidable. Before the spar commenced, Crater, the headmaster, gave Ronan and Shulapin the opportunity to pick which of the 4 second years they wanted to face. The year 2 students included Nasto, a blonde guy who looked like an AI-generated character; Brahm, a brute who looked like a broke Shock O'Neal; Karun, a purple-haired guy who looked like the past; Arena, an orange-haired baddie who looked like she needed clapping from all angles. In the audience, Errol sat nervously watching her brother, scared for his life but determined to cheer him on. Just then, Crater asked Ronan and Shulapin to select their opponents. Ronan, the arrogant, pompous fool, asked to fight all 4 second years at once. The entire Coliseum went silent, and even Crater was taken aback by the sheer audacity of Ronan's suggestion. Hearing this absurdity, Crater turned to consult with the other administrators, especially Nabros, the school's swordmaster, for approval. After a moment's deliberation, Nabros grinned and gave the green light. With that, the spar was set in motion, and Ronan would be facing all 4 second-year students by himself. The year 2 students were infuriated by Ronan's cocky request. They thought Ronan must have had steel balls to look down on them in such a way, and they swore to castrate him and make him swallow those same steel balls. With that, they prepared their weapons, seething with anticipation. The battle began when Nasto, the AI-generated blonde, charged at Ronan with incredible speed, his long sword aiming straight for Ronan's chest. But Ronan, like something out of the Matrix, dodged effortlessly, leaving Nasto's sword to slice through empty air. Next up was Arena, who swung her sword at Ronan. However, Ronan quickly deflected the attack, and their blades clashed in a fiery exchange of sparks. As Ronan fended her off, Karun saw his chance and launched his own attack, yelling for Arena to duck as he thrust his spear toward Ronan. Ronan's reflexes were sharp as ever. He parried Karun's spear, sending him stumbling back. Unbeknownst to Ronan, Brahm, the brute with a sword so large it could split continents, was lurking behind him, ready to deliver a devastating sneak attack. With a massive swing, Brahm aimed to end Ronan's life. But in the last second, Ronan sidestepped, narrowly dodging the fatal blow. As Ronan regrouped, he realized that the entire second-year team was now rushing at him from all angles. Knowing playtime was over, he shifted into high gear, charging toward them at an incredible speed. Ronan's sword moved with precision, and with a few swift strikes, he shattered their weapons like brittle glass. The fight narrowed down to Ronan versus Brahm. The brute, angry and humiliated, stood toe-to-toe with Ronan, determined to take him down alone. He swung his mighty blade with all his strength, but as soon as his sword collided with Ronan's, it shattered to pieces. The moment Ronan shattered the weapons of the sophomore students, the Coliseum erupted into a frenzy. The crowd was roaring with excitement, amazed by Ronan's sheer power and skill. The second-year students, on the other hand, stood dumbfounded, unable to comprehend how their supposedly indestructible weapons had been reduced to shards. In the middle of the arena, Ronan stood tall, exuding the calm confidence of a true Giga Chad. Errol, watching from the stands, was overwhelmed with emotion. She couldn't believe that her once worthless brother was now the star of the academy, shining brighter than she ever could have imagined. Ronan, playing the humility card, tried to downplay his feat. He awkwardly bowed to the defeated Year 2 students, thanking them for the opportunity to spar. This act of humility left Asel and Maria scratching their heads, wondering if Ronan was okay mentally after such a display of strength. Despite Ronan's awkward attempt at humility, Brahm, excited beyond measure, grabbed Ronan's hand and raised it high in the air, declaring him the victor in front of the ecstatic crowd. Errol, unable to contain her emotions, burst into tears. She had never imagined that the day would come when her brother would stand victorious in front of thousands, revered as a rising star in the academy. Meanwhile, in the crowd, a purple-haired girl named Akalusha watched the entire scene unfold. Intrigued by Ronan, she smirked to herself, thinking he might just be someone worth her attention. Later that evening, the freshmen gathered for a grand entrance banquet. The tables were stacked with food, and Ronan, Asel, and Maria sat together, laughing and eating to their heart's content. As they devoured the feast, Asel asked Ronan if his sister, Errol, had made it home safely. Ronan nodded, explaining that although Errol had been emotional after his victory, she left, and he had sent the baby black dragon, Sita, with her as extra protection, just in case. Just as Ronan grabbed a juicy chicken drumstick, preparing to take a hearty bite, Shulapin crept up behind him, whispering nonsense in his ear. Startled, Ronan jumped up from his seat, glaring at Shulapin in disgust, wondering what the sleazy scumbag wanted this time around and accusing him of wanting another fight. But Shulapin quickly clarified that he wasn't there to fight. Instead, he had some concerns about Ronan's sister, Errol. Much to Ronan's disgust, the King of Simps began asking an onslaught of cringeworthy questions about Errol's safety, his eyes filled with love-struck desperation. Ronan, fed up with the line of questioning, snapped, telling Shulapin that Errol's safety was his responsibility, not Shulapin's. He firmly reminded him that he wasn't Errol's boyfriend, so he needed to stop acting like one. Shulapin, taken aback, tried to explain that he was just concerned, but the conversation was cut short. A powerful aura swept into the banquet hall as Akalusia, the purple-haired girl from earlier, strode in with an air of confidence that turned heads. She sauntered over, her gaze locking onto Shulapin, with a mocking grin asked why the Academy's golden boy was all flustered over a girl. Shulapin, clearly irritated, ignored her jab and turned to leave, knowing he wouldn't win a verbal duel with Akalusia. But Akalusia wasn't interested in Shulapin. Her eyes were on Ronan, so she approached him, her smirk growing wider as she complimented his impressive performance at the Colosseum. Just as Ronan was about to ask what she wanted, Asel grabbed his sleeve and whispered urgently that Akalusia had taken the first position in the practical mage entrance exam. Apparently, she had completely obliterated her opponent earlier that day, earning her a reputation as a top-tier mage. With this new information, Ronan turned to Akalusia, demanding to know what she wanted from him. Akalusia's expression shifted into something more sinister, her eyes glinting mischievously. She smiled and said she had an offer for him. Before Ronan could respond, the chick reached into her cloak and pulled out a gleaming purple jade necklace, offering it to him. Seeing the purple jade necklace, Ronan immediately recognized its significance. It was the Akalusia's necklace, a symbol of one's invitation to join the prominent noble family that bore the same name. The Akalusia's family was well known for its meritocratic nature, allowing any talented individual to join regardless of their background. The necklace, known as the Invitation to Akalusia's, was a rare and prestigious item, and in his past life, Ronan had received a similar offer from his army commander Adeshan, who was herself a member of the Akalusia's family. Adeshan had warned Ronan that joining the Akalusia's required passing a test, but she had also expressed confidence in his abilities. However, that was in the past, and now Akalusia had left Ronan with a similar offer, an invitation to change his fate from a useless nobody with no worthy background into someone powerful and influential. As she walked away, she urged him to make the right choice and change his life. The next day, the academy buzzed with activity as the incoming freshmen were assigned to their dormitories. Dormitory placements were based on students' entrance exam scores rather than family connections or wealth, which set the academy apart from other institutions. The intermediate-ranked students were assigned to modest dorms, clean, functional, and comfortable. The bottom-ranked students, however, were sent to a rundown, stinky dormitory that could easily be mistaken for a horse stable. These unfortunate cook losers would likely spend the rest of their first year complaining about their fate unless their grades improved drastically. As one of the top students, Ronan was sent to the luxury dormitory. Upon entering, he marveled at the extravagant furnishings. The room was furnished with elegant, handcrafted furniture, and the bed looked large and inviting, clearly meant for some classic plot development. As Ronan explored his room, he noticed a registration form on the table. It was for selecting the courses he wanted to take, and without hesitation, Ronan checked every box. He didn't want to miss a single opportunity to learn something new in his reincarnated life. After filling out the form, he submitted it to the academy's basic instructor, a man named Abba, who told him he shouldn't have selected the beginner sword lesson class because it was obvious he was already good. However, Ronan yelled at the aggressive face, telling him he needed to take the course, but the visually assaulting face instructor stood his ground. Abba insisted that letting Ronan stay in the class would demotivate other students who were willing to learn. Later that day, Ronan sat near the school's lake pondering on all the classes the teachers declined him to take, including the archery class and the hunting class. The thought of getting kicked out of every class because of his overpowered skill nearly caused his head to explode. Just then, he heard a voice behind him, and as he turned, he was faced with Nabros, who asked him why he was not in class. However, before he could answer, the low-budget X-Men storm cut him off, and assumed he must be done with classes since he was too good. Ronan, still pissed, complained how all the classes rejected him, but while he vented, Nabrose thought of how Ronan had mimicked and practiced her swordplay techniques just by looking at it just once. With that, she collected a sword from Ronan and told him she wanted to teach him a very important hands-on lesson. In a blink of an eye, Nabrose unleashed her mighty aura, and the lake's water erupted. Just then, Ronan could see every particle of water suspended in the air, as if time had suddenly stopped. Nabrose then instructed Ronan to watch closely, and with the speed of lightning, she infused her mana into the sword and then slashed the water, causing its particles to glow, emitting a powerful mystic energy that left Ronan stunned. Just then, Ronan stared at the lake and realized that Nabrose's powerful mana move had divided the lake of water into two, which stunned him even more. That moment, Ronan realized that even though he was a master swordsman, his attack was nowhere in the same range as Nabrose's. Nabrose, on the other hand, lectured Ronan on the importance of a swordsman using mana to perfect his strike, making it more formidable. However, she soon realized that Ronan was lost in space and didn't get anything she said, which made her realize that Ronan was a complete dumbass and didn't know a thing about mana talk, more of using it. With that, Nabrose urged Ronan to attend her class, even though her class was not for freshmen but sophomore year. She would make an exception for him on the condition that Ronan got for himself a strong, sturdy sword. So several hours later, Ronan went to the blacksmith Shullipan had informed Eril, his sister, to go if she needed a very good sword, and he went along with Shullian's family identification plaque. With this, Ronan, Asel, and Maria entered the blacksmith store, even though the store seemed shabby and more like a haunted house. On getting inside, they began to wonder if it was truly a blacksmith store, or if Shullipan was capping all the way. Just then, the inner door of the store opened, and out of the door, a ferocious wolf emerged, asking why they had entered the store uninvited and decided to disturb his lovely sleep. Ronan then showed the wolf Shullipan family plague of identification, explaining that they were sent by Shullipan based on recommendation. However, the monster demands they get lost, hinting that having the Shullipan family identification plague does not actually make them a member of the family. Noticing their reluctance to leave, the wolf remarked that if Ronan wanted a sword that bad, then he would have to sacrifice Asel's hand so he could use as a midday snack, which gave Asel a total shock. Upon hearing this, Ronan became furious and remarked that the wolf had actually crossed the line. That moment, Ronan drew him his sword and impaled the wolf on the chest, but he soon realized that the wolf wore an invisible armor that made the attack impenetrable. Seeing how fierce Ronan's attack was, the wolf explained to him that his attitude from earlier was all a test to prove if Ronan's skill was worthy of a blade or not. The wolf added that he had no intention of harming anyone, and he was also a vegetarian, so there was no way he could have ripped Asel's arm apart. That said, the wolf introduced himself as Dedekin and informed Ronan and the team that he was the blacksmith's apprentice. Dedekin further informed Ronan that he would take him to the secret place of the store where he would get swords of the best quality. The next moment, they all moved into the inner room, and then Dedekin pressed a hidden button, and they were in an elevator that took them down the basement. On getting to the basement where the best swords were made, Ronan was completely entranced. However, Dedekin assured him that he would ensure he got the best sword from the best artisan of the empire. Will Ronan get the perfect sword and learn to sense his mana, making him the strongest swordsman ever? Comment swordsman if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.